Come on! Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another week. Originally, we were going to do Within Temptation's Mother Earth, and we are still going to bring that to you next week. However, in light of the recent events that transpired earlier this month, we thought we would call an audible. And by that, I mean the tragic announcement of the death of guitarist and vocalist extraordinaire Alexi Laiho from Children of Bodom. The metal world was shook when we found out that Alexi had passed away sometime earlier this month. And we thought it would be a fitting tribute for us to do a Children of Bodom episode just because, obviously, the timeliness and B, really as a tribute to Alexi's work. It's a bit of a shock to all of us. And I'll be the first to say I was never the biggest Children of Bodom fan, only because I really never heard a lot of their stuff. But just hearing the announcement, it really kind of forced us to dig deep and start, checking this out, because I think it's something that we both had missed.
Agreed. I will say this is a band that it was probably the first death metal band that I ever really enjoyed and kind of led the way for me to be a little bit more open-minded about death vocals and things that are a little more harsh. So, but I was always kind of drawn to the Something Wild album. Is that what it was? Or the Something Wild album.
Which is one of their first discs, actually. It
came out, you know what? I'm sorry. I meant to say the Follow the Reaper album.
Okay.
And the song, especially the song Every Time I Die, probably my favorite Bodom song. But I was drawn to that album because I really enjoyed the keys. Just that kind of melodic keyboard. Very it sounds like it was, the keys were very inspired by Jens Johansson from Stradivarius, but it was just so different hearing a band that was like melodic but didn't have clean vocals, and it was really interesting to me. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I can't believe I'm enjoying this. This is good stuff. So it was cool to kind of really listen. I ended up listening to this album 6 times this week.
Let's get into the album we selected, right? Because they have a pretty sizable discography, and they started in 1993, and they really went up strong up until last year with their Hexed album. I wasn't really sure which album to do. If you ask different people, I think everyone has a different favorite, so to speak. So I was doing a little bit of research, and I found an interview that Alexi had done with Kerrang! Magazine, where he was asked to rank all the Bodom albums from, basically from 10 to 1 in terms of his favorites. And as I was reading it, it was, a pretty interesting read. And this is the description that he came out with for the number 1 album, which he had as Hate Crew Deathroll. And this is a direct quote. "That's the album that fucking broke everything for us. The shows got bigger. Festivals got bigger, and we sold a lot of records. I could have never imagined being on MTV Headbangers Ball. Me and my sister grew up watching Vanessa Warwick, so for us, Headbangers Ball wasn't just a TV show, it was a fucking event. We always had to watch it in secret too, because it would be on at 11:30 at night, and we had to be in bed. But we got permission to tape it, so one of us could be up to press record on the VHS. Of course, me and my sister would plot out a way to get the other downstairs to watch it, and it was the best shit ever. It just goes to show that there were probably kids out there doing exactly what me and my sister did, and seeing Children of Bodom on Headbangers Ball, which is pretty fucking cool." And from what I understand, he actually has a tattoo from the album art of this album, because I guess he just considered this the pinnacle of Bodom. So if Alexi thought that Hate Crew Deathroll was their number 1 album, that was the album that we were going to choose. And that's kind of the one that we're going to break down for everybody today.
Right. And, I learned a lot about this album, the band, Alexi himself. One of the things was that the Hate Crew was like a group of friends that the Bodom members formed, and there was a rite of passage, which absolutely sounds horrible to me, but it's called the death roll, where if you've ever done a keg stand when you were in college, this is where you would do a keg stand. You do you basically stand on your head on top of a beer keg, and you would, chug as much beer from the keg as you can before being let down. But in this case, they would chug a bottle of vodka until the entire bottle was empty, and then they would land on the other side performing the flip, at which I mean,
just the thought of that,
yeah,
brings me back about 20 years, and also makes me scared to death.
Yeah, rock and roll, I guess. When I was reading that, and I'm like, did I read that wrong? No, that's exactly how it read. So yeah, he has those letters, COBHC for Children of Bodom Hate Crew. They were tattooed on his left hand. So
there you go.
Yeah. So I don't know if the album was named after that or the activity was named after the album, but either way, that's something. And also, I found out about where the name of the band came from. Because
all right, I think at this point everyone has to sit down, get out their history books, get out a pencil, and start taking notes, because this was definitely news to me when I saw this as well. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Professor Nietzsche. Do your thing.
Well, the band was originally called Inearthed, so Children of Bodom wasn't their original name, but it turns out that they had named the band after one of the most famous unsolved homicide cases in Finnish criminal history. It took place back in 1960 at Bodom Lake, where 3 teenagers were attacked, one of which actually survived, and 3 of them died by stabbing and blunt force trauma to their heads. So that's wonderful. And the perpetrator was never identified. And all these theories have gone on about who it was, but they never figured it out. Yeah, never solved it. And the surviving teenager was arrested on suspicion of committing the murders 44 years later in 2004, but he was found not guilty. So to this day, it's never been solved. And since the lake was named Bodom Lake, and they were children,
there's your name of the band.
Yeah. So
now,
real positive stuff to start out the day today.
Yeah, it sounds like we're about to do a black metal episode and go to Norway, but we'll stay in Finland for the time being. What was your first exposure to these guys? Because I kind of have an interesting story when I first heard them. But I'll give you the floor. When did you first hear Bodom's music?
Yeah, I was always aware that the band existed, but to be honest with you, I don't think I ever even heard them. So it was when I moved to upstate New York and I became friends with Caleb. He was the one who said to me, like, I think you might like this band. You know, he was into a little bit more heavier stuff. He was okay with these death vocals, which I just was never a fan of. And so, you know, I snagged a couple of their earlier albums, and I used to just shuffle my iTunes albums randomly while I was working, and whatever came on. And one day, Follow the Reaper came on, which was the album that came out prior to Hate Crew Deathroll in 2000. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, you know, as I mentioned earlier, this is quite good. And I ended up really enjoying it. And, you know, through the years, I always kept, my radar on the band, and I would always buy their newest releases and listen to them. I was never a huge fan, admittedly, but I always enjoyed them and always appreciated something a little bit different. And I realize now, like, how many other bands have been inspired by their sound, you know, since they became popular.
Yeah, they really were trendsetters in a number of ways. I first heard Alexi play on one of his side projects, and the guy was in a number of different bands. I would argue that maybe the second most successful project he had after or while he was doing Bodom was a band called Synergy. It was a band that had released 3 albums: Beware the Heavens, which came out in 1999, To Hell and Back, which came out in 2000, and another album called Suicide by My Side, which came out in 2002. And this was a little bit different in the sense that it was not quite as heavy as Bodom, just in terms of the music, but it also had Kimberly Goss, a clean female vocalist, sing over the top of his ridiculous guitar playing, and that kind of that keyboard sound, which I guess everyone has now come to know Bodom for, between that interplay between the keyboards and the guitars. And so I first heard Alexi play on these 3 Synergy albums. I was a pretty big fan of theirs, going back about 20 years. And when I was kind of going through my Synergy, booklets for the CDs that I had purchased back in the day, I found out about this other band, but for whatever reason, I guess at the time, I just wasn't a big melodic death metal guy. And we'll get into that, I'm sure, when we do another melodic death metal album. But, I guess I'll say that because I wasn't really into that other style, and because I just enjoyed Synergy so much, I just never really looked at his other work until it's probably about 10 years ago when I first heard them. And it was one of those things where I felt like I guess I had just kind of glossed over them, because my foray into harsher vocals and to that style was stuff that was really just kind of coming out, like newer Soilwork stuff, some of the In Flames albums that were coming out at the time, and bands like Mercenary, who are some of my all-time favorite bands. But I just never really checked these guys out until they were like well into their career and almost changing styles a bit, because they kind of did a little bit of a pivot midway through their career in terms of their sound.
Right. And this album is kind of where I think the pivot took place. I too was a fan of Synergy. I really liked Kimberly's vocals a lot. I thought she was a really talented singer, and I was surprised to do some research and realize that she really hasn't done anything since Synergy disbanded in the early 2000s. And her and Alexi were actually married in 2002 after dating for 4 years, and they only stayed married, I think, for a couple of years, but they remained close friends, and I think were close friends up until his death. And also another thing I never really realized was that Marco Hayatala from Nightwish was the bass player on the last 2 Synergy albums. So a lot of Finnish metal royalty involved.
Came through the ranks of that band,
Yeah, and so same with me.
I always thought, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I always thought they were like kind of like a cultish type band, in the sense that they had a really strong following, and fans of the band really loved their work, but at the same time, they never really exploded onto the scene. I know they toured with Nightwish, but they never really just got to that level that an Epica or a Within Temptation or a Nightwish would, ultimately get to. But that just could be a product of the fact that they stopped recording in 2002, and these other bands really hit it in the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, when those other bands really started to take off.
Yeah, I agree. I think that had they continued, there's a good chance that they would have seen more success. But, the final album was released in 2002. So, they were another band that I think I had heard so many times, or heard of. I just assumed they were a much bigger deal than they actually were.
Yeah.
But going back and listening, I never realized it was the same guitar player from Children of Bodom, but I mean, you can hear that, that just technical prowess that he has as a guitar player really shine through. And then when you go and listen to Children of Bodom, obviously it's very apparent there as well.
Yeah. Well, let's get into Hate Crew for a second. It's interesting because I don't remember hearing this album. I feel like it's something I probably heard, but I just didn't either pay attention to it, or it's possible I just never heard this album. And I'll admit it. I was surprised that he picked an album as his favorite, and I have just never heard it. I think I've listened to thousands upon thousands of albums, and this either just didn't register with me at the time that I listened to it, or I just listen to it once, or I never listen to it. It's kind of interesting when you go back and when you look at this thing. But the second I put it on, the first track, Needled 24/7, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I said to myself, "My God, there's a clear void in my knowledge base because arguably one of the best songs on the disc. It hits you like a ton of bricks because it's just so fast and powerful. And his guitar work, I think, stands out above everything else on the disc. To be honest with you."
Yep, absolutely agreed. It's, to me, like the whole album is just like, it's this just 40-minute, like, it's just a blast of just fast guitar riffs and like, heavy growling, and like it's just very powerful stuff. Like, just really, I was like surprised when it ended. I was like, oh my God, that was it. Like, it was so fast, 9 tracks, and just like blew by. I'll admit, like, the first few times I heard it, it was almost like it all kind of bled together for me. Like, it took me a few listens to really start to kind of appreciate the
nuances, I guess.
Yeah,
exactly. I think that's how I felt.
Exactly. Like, or just how to tell the difference between one song from the other. I mean, like I said, this is not like my favorite type of music, but I ended up, by the time I was done with this, really actually appreciating and enjoying this album a lot.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's funny. They start off with such a heavy hitter that some of the tracks that come after it, for example, even 6 Pounder and Chokehold, they slow it down just a trifle, where you can notice the difference, where everything is not at that like lightning fast pace. But when he starts playing his solos, it's right back to like fast as lightning. What really stuck out for me on Needled and some of the other tracks, such as Bodom Beach Terror, for example, I just loved that guitar solo with the accompanying keyboard solo that follows it or precedes it. I've always been a fan of that. I thought that Stratovarius were the masters of that, and here we are with another Finnish band that just takes that to another level with the way that those two instruments complement each other. I just found that this album had like quiet little hooks that just stayed with me for hours and until the next track, and by that I mean every track was like kind of sticking in my head by the end of this, and I did listen to it a bunch this week. I just love the way that those two instruments complement each other.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I had mentioned earlier that that's kind of what drew me into the band initially. I found that on an initial listening of this album, it wasn't as key heavy as I had remembered from their previous release. And I think I kind of maybe initially kind of, I don't know, like, thought that this wasn't going to be my favorite thing in the world, or just I wasn't going to enjoy it as much, because it felt like they were moving into a more thrashier, like more like darker, crunchier kind of sound, with a little less of the melodic part with the keyboards and everything. But you definitely get that keyboard, that classic keyboard sound that they were known for. It's still here. It's just not as prominent, but I'm gonna bring this up early just because I feel like it makes sense at this point in the conversation. But my favorite track from this album was actually Angels Don't Kill, which might be the slowest song on the album. It's kind of like a mid-tempo song, but just because I love, I feel like the keys are really prominent in this track, and it's really dark, and the guitar riffs are dark, and the keys are really haunting, and there is on my heart to show me a blackness. So I'll just come in with it early. Like, that was my pick for the week. I that's the song that really stood out to me. Every time, the more I listened to the album, that was the one that really felt like a little bit different and in a good way.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I actually have a note on that. This really is the change of pace track, no question about it. It's the one, I guess you'd say, mid-tempo track on the album where everything else is either fast or faster, depending on how fast they want to go. And it's fitting. I think it's a fitting place on the album because it is right in the middle of the album. I feel like it's just like the turning point of, all right, we hit you with a bunch of fast stuff. We're going to slow it down now, and then right back to it with Triple Corpse Hammer Blow. And I should laugh. I some of these song titles are just absolutely ridiculous, but it's not least of which is Little Blood Red Riding Hood. I think that might be one of my favorite song titles ever, just because I think it's hysterical. Angels Don't Kill was strategically placed and for good reason. I think they did an excellent job with that. I think that if you have an entire album, even if it's only 35 or 40 minutes, but if you have an entire album, which is the same tempo and it's just, they either slow it down or make it a little bit quicker, I think it loses something. I think you need a track like this in there to really make some of the other tracks even stand out.
I don't think I could have said that any better. Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's funny when I was listening to this, and I guess you just can't help but hear other either influences or other bands when you hear certain things. I think it's always natural to make a comparison. I just want to name a couple that really just stood out to me, right? Like, number one, I hear Nightwish throughout all of this. Obviously, it's heavier. Obviously, the vocals are different. But I think that the way that the keyboards kind of, when they're not doing a keyboard solo, I think that the orchestration on some of this stuff really reminds me of like classic Nightwish, like that power metal Nightwish sound, which is unmistakable.
I can't argue with that either. Definitely, as mentioned before, there's definitely like a Stradivarius influence here. Where it all kind of takes a turn into being its own entity is the vocals, in my opinion. It puts it in its own category. And to be honest with you, like, there are certain death vocals that I don't care for. Alexi's vocals are at the top for me as far as death metal vocals that I actually quite enjoy. I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it doesn't have like that really heavy guttural kind of sound to it. It's a little more
like a higher pitch, almost like a scream more. And again, I'm not a vocal coach, but it's distinguishable from a lot of other death metal vocals. And I think it's time we do a death metal album, just because Trial by Fire for you. I think we gotta play some of this real true death metal stuff just to get your thoughts on it. But I agree with you. I think Alexi's vocals are very unique when it comes to this style. And a lot of people classify it as melodic death metal. I never really did. To me, it was really just power metal with different vocals, personally.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense, in all honesty. Like, I mean, I think both make sense. I mean, just because it's melodic and it's death metal. So I don't know that it, why. I don't know if you would, I don't know if like what you listen to now is like current, modern melodic death metal, if it fits into that category. I mean, it's kind of hard to say, but I mean, if you're going to consider this like the birth of that genre, like, it makes sense that this band, was the forebearer, I guess, of that type of music. But yeah, it is very, very power metal as well. I would say that this album especially definitely has a thrash metal kind of vibe to it as well.
I definitely agree with that. And maybe that's just because of the raw production on some of these tracks. And it's not a badly produced album by any means. It's just a little bit raw. Going back to some of the other influences, I listened to a track like Six Pounder, the second track on the album, and I just can't help but hearing a Pantera vibe to it. Never the biggest Pantera fan, but I do admit that Alexi almost sounds like Dimebag Darrell with some of those riffs in that song. That stuck out to me. And then there's another band that I know you're a big fan of as well. I hear a bit of a Machine Supremacy vibe. That Swedish Sid power metal thing that they got going on with like the video game sound that they have. I hear that in there too, just because of the way that some of these tracks are constructed. I don't know if you hear that as well.
I can't say I noticed it, but now that you mention it, it definitely makes sense. I don't know about you, but after I listened to Six Pounder, I was kind of in the mood for a hamburger.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually one of my favorite tracks on the album, to be honest with you. And I'll say one other thing. You know, you had mentioned that thrash influence before. I also hear a little bit of Slayer on here as well, and I think that was, I mean, I haven't read anything to that effect, but I think that Alexi's guitar work is very heavily influenced by that early Slayer sound. And ironically enough, one of the Japanese bonus tracks for this is Silent Screen, which is a Slayer cover. So I think there's something to be said for that as well.
Oh, for sure. Like you can tell I actually went back and listened to Follow the Reaper after I listened to this album, and you can definitely tell that there was a change in the direction of the band. And it's kind of funny that Alexi, called this his favorite album, his favorite Bodom album, because like it's gotten some criticism from some of the hardcore fans of the earlier albums, the old school fans. So maybe the change wasn't well liked, right away, but according to Wikipedia, it's All Music designated as their best ever album and described it as an album that is particularly worth listening to. So I can totally understand like both sides of the coin here. Like this is definitely a really well done album. It's got, Alexi shows his chops as a vocalist, a guitar player, and a songwriter all in one shot. And it's easy to see why he became such a legend in heavy metal and why his work is going to be sorely missed.
100% right. And I'll say this, I think that we have the luxury of coming into this as not longtime fans of the band. And I think that that's the reason why, I think we liked it as much as we did. And sometimes when you find a band and you're used to one sound, had we been a fan of the band back in the mid 90s, we may not have liked this kind of transition, if you will, just because there was a certain sound that we had come to expect. And then there was a marked change from it, a departure, if you will. But this, coming from on the back end, 17 or 18 years later, highly enjoyable. And it's almost because of my ignorance that I think I enjoyed it as much as I did, because I feel like I have to go back and now check out some of that older stuff that I also missed, because, like I said, his work is sorely going to be missed. And I'm getting into the band obviously after the fact, but I'm into it. So I have to check out more.
It's definitely akin to the conversation that we had a few weeks ago about Dream Theater's Falling into Infinity. It's kind of like, and I also kind of in my head was thinking of like when Halloween released Pink Bubbles Go Ape and Chameleon. It's like, are these albums really bad, or are they just, victims of the band's early success and them not following that path anymore? Even so much, I guess like even, when we discussed, the new Nightwish album last week, is it a disappointing album? Is it not a very good album? Or are we just used to Nightwish doing a certain thing so many times and they didn't do something that was expected? So, if you took it and just listened to it by itself and you had no idea who the band was, maybe you would feel differently about it. And I feel like in this case, since neither one of us are really huge Children of Bodom fans, we could kind of listen to it with fresh ears and not have a preconceived notion about what the band is supposed to sound like.
I couldn't have said it any better myself. I think that, some bands evolve and some bands release the same album over and over again. And it gets a little stale after a while, even if it's done well. It's when you just release the same thing over and over again. And it really takes skill. A band like Amorphous, who releases the same album constantly, but it's so good that I almost forget that I've heard that same sound for the last 7 discs, and that is not a slight against them. They are fantastic and one of my favorite bands, and a band that's probably worth doing in the near future, but having a discussion about. But to say that their albums have changed that much over the years would be an overstatement. And then you have this, which is really just more of like a transition where they were pivoting away from their older sound, and works for some people, may not work as well for others, but I certainly enjoyed it. As far as my track of the week, I'm going to go with the first track, Needle 24/7, just because I found myself humming that even this morning when I woke up. I love the fast pace of the song, and I think that it's the perfect opening track.
It's along with Hate Crew Deathroll, the title track. Those were also 2 tracks that, besides Angels Don't Kill, really stood out to me as songs I really appreciate, like really enjoyed. And it's kind of funny because it was the first, last, and middle track of the album. But yeah, I definitely understand why you would choose that. It's a really, really good tune.
Yeah, it starts great. It has that transitional track in the middle, and then it ends with a bang. So it was constructed well. Let's just
I love the beginning of Hate Crew. That's a hard thing to say really fast. Hate Crew Deathroll. The little keyboard opening to it reminded me of like a Final Fantasy game, like a soundtrack from a Final Fantasy game.
Yeah, and then it just takes your head off with the riff. You know, it's kind of funny where that goes.
Yep. So that those were definitely my 3 favorite tracks. But as I mentioned earlier, Angels Don't Kill was definitely my favorite.
It stand out for you.
Yeah.
What are you going to rank this? A scale of 1 to 10?
For me, like as not a huge like Children of Bodom fan, but somebody who really like just enjoys the band and appreciates them. For me, I mean, it's a solid 8. It's very good. It's not my favorite thing in the world. It's a little bit on the short side for a full length album, but you can't take anything away from the musicianship and the songwriting, and it's very good. For me, it's a solid 8.
Yeah, I was going to give it the same thing. I think that if I really delve deeper into their back catalog, that may move up or down depending on, kind of what I think about the other stuff. But just in a vacuum, it was something that I really enjoyed. And, it's something that I'll definitely play again. I think we'd be remiss not to just talk about some of Alexi's accolades over the years. He's on the one hand, I think that he's an underrated guitar player because he just, you never really hear his name talked about with like the all-time greats. But in 2004, he was ranked the 96th greatest heavy metal guitarist in the world by Guitar World. They also ranked him as one of the top 50 fastest guitar players in the world, which if you listen to this album, I think that's not a bad conclusion to come to. Roadrunner Records had ranked him number 41 for the greatest frontman of all time, which I thought was a nice little feather in his cap, because you never really talk much about the vocals. It's always about the fact that he's a guitar aficionado. And one other one, which I thought was really interesting. Total Guitar had a public vote that they wanted to put forth and I guess ask the people what they thought in terms of who the greatest metal guitarist of all time was. And coming in with over 20% of the vote, he was ranked the number 1 metal guitarist of all time. And obviously these publications are going to say certain things about, what the quote unquote experts think. But when the fans put you as number 1, I think that that's probably the biggest compliment of all.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that to me, like that's just, that kind of recognition from that many people that don't have, a dog in the fight, so to speak. Yeah, I think you're right. That means an awful lot, and it's well deserved.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna listen to some more of his stuff just because I missed it. It was a void in my knowledge, and I'm going to go back and listen to some more. And with that, I think that's kind of a nice place to put a bow on our little tribute to Children of Bodom, and then obviously he'll be sorely missed. And I speak for everyone when I say that the world was a better place with him in it when he was creating music.
No doubt about it. And, I was not aware that Children of Bodom had splintered last year, or I guess it would have been 2019. I don't even know.
The end of 2019, early.
Yeah, I don't even know what year it is anymore. I wasn't aware that they weren't a band anymore. And I also wasn't aware that Alexi was in poor health, which my understanding is that this wasn't a sudden thing.
No, they did. I think they did a pretty decent job of keeping that under wraps. I guess that must have been the family's wishes. It was certainly news to me. It's funny. Just one other anecdote. I've never seen the band live. I've seen so many bands over the years, but for some reason, I just either skipped Bodom shows because of other obligations, or I simply just didn't. I guess the timing just didn't work for me. But in retrospect, I went back and I watched some of the live videos on YouTube, and you can see it's not a product of the studio. The guy can just shred live too. It's a shame that it's something that I'll never get to see.
Yeah, same. I really wish that I would have been able to. I feel like had I seen them live when I was younger, I might have had more interest in the band when I got older. I think that seeing them live would have made a huge difference.
I completely agree with that. But alas, we have the videos and we have the music to look back on. And as I said, we'll bring Within Temptation's Mother Earth to everybody next week. But before we go, I just want to kind of reflect back on our best of 2020 episode. I think that it just deserves a little bit more conversation. I know that we were talking off air. There was a couple of things you wanted to talk about in particular.
Yeah, there was just so much to cover that, and I felt like I was doing a lot of talking, and I wanted to make sure that you got to talk about your albums as well, since I got to kind of start the conversation last week. But this is my the detriment of me not being a note taker, I guess. But all the better. I probably would have just gotten a little long winded anyway. There was a couple of things I just wanted to mention. There was a couple of EPs that were released in 2020. One being by a band called Dendera, who we mentioned a couple of times on the podcast. Ashley Edison's their vocalist. He's also the vocalist for Power Quest. They released a very good EP with a lot of cool guests on the album, and the album was called Reborn into Darkness. We didn't really count EPs in our list, so that's kind of why it didn't make the list, but I thought it was worth mentioning. I also wanted to mention Soilwork also released an EP. I mean, would you consider an EP? I mean, there were only 5 tracks, but one of them was like 16 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, to me, it was definitely an EP. It just didn't quite make it to that album level. But, I think you make a good point. There were actually a number of good EPs. You mentioned 2 of them. I wanted to just mention the Wolverine EP that I had spoke about earlier, called The Darkened Sun. I thought all 3 of those EPs were really good. Unfortunately, though, because we are doing top 50 albums, none of them qualify. Otherwise, I'm sure that you're talking about 3 of the better EPs that came out last year.
Yeah, and the Soilwork EP was called A Wisp of the Atlantic, and it has a really epic title track that's 16 and a half minutes long. Really good stuff.
Which is different for them because a lot of their stuff has always traditionally been kind of shorter, hit, get in, get out, and then move on to the next track. So it was interesting to see them do such an epic song. Yeah,
for sure. I was definitely intrigued when I first downloaded it and saw how long the track was. Also the track The Nothingness and the Devil was very enjoyable, and if you like Soilwork, that's a track for you. And a natural segue here, speaking of Soilwork, one of the cool things that came out of the pandemic and the time that these musicians had spent at home and not being able to tour was this project called At the Movies, which kind of was just this YouTube only thing where a bunch of metal musicians got together and recorded these covers of tracks from 80s movies. And you will hear Bjorn from Soilwork do a lot of his really excellent clean vocals, and they do really, really well done covers of tracks like No Easy Way Out from Rocky IV. What else did they do? I'm just off the top of my head. St. Elmo. So one of my favorite tracks from the 80s is St. Elmo's Fire from the movie St. Elmo's Fire by John Parr. They do a really killer cover of that song. That was probably my favorite of all the covers that they did. No Easy Way Out might have been if Beast in Black didn't record what I consider the definitive version of that song.
I could not agree more with that. That was the one track that and I thought that they did a fantastic job. And I think that everything's available on YouTube. I'm not sure if they've actually released them for purchase at this point, but the No Easy Way Out cover was like really, really good. But the definitive version was definitely the Beast in Black version.
Right. And they do, they do cover of The Power of Love from Back to the Future, The Heat Is On from Beverly Hills Cop, the theme from The Neverending Story, like just really good stuff. There's appearances by Ronnie Atkins from Pretty Maids, who we mentioned previously. Really good stuff. I don't have the list of the musicians' names right in front of me at the moment, but it's basically like a super band of just guys at home doing their thing, and somebody produced it, put it all together, and it sounds like a band that's all in one place. But just really, 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 really good stuff, and super cool that they found something that they could do during the pandemic to kind of, keep their ears on the music and to entertain the fans. And I believe the album was released on vinyl. It's not available on like iTunes or Spotify or anything like that, but I do believe that you can buy the album on vinyl. I think they have a web store somewhere. And one other band I wanted to mention is a local, not local, but a U.S. Metal band called Anaria, and they're out of New England. They released a new album in 2020 called Exile, but it came out at the very end of the year. I didn't really get a chance to listen to it until 2021, but I really enjoyed it. So I just wanted to mention that as something, and we'll post a song from that during the week on the social media pages.
Nice. Speaking of the social media pages, we had posted our top 25 and top 50 respectively, our playlist, if you will, that kind of goes along with our best of 2020 episode. And you'll notice that on my playlist, it's actually 51 tracks, not 50. I added a bonus track, if you will, from a band called Project Aegis. It was really a charity project, kind of spearheaded by Matt Smith, the mastermind guitar player, singer from Theocracy. But the reason I bring this up is this particular track that I added. It's 9 minutes in length. And you want to talk about a cast of vocalists. Check this out. You got obviously Matt Smith doing vocals and wrote the song, but you have guest spots on the one track by Neil Morse, obviously of Neil Morse Band, Transatlantic, Flying Colors, Spock's Beard, fame, etc. Daniel Hyman from Lost Horizon and Heed and Harmony and other bands as well. Leah McHenry, who has become one of the better symphonic metal vocalists out there as well. The way that these three very unique vocalists, plus Matt Smith, of course, come together, it's nothing short of spectacular, and it deserves to be heard. And quite frankly, if they released a full disc, I'm sure it would have been in the top 50, but instead we just have the one track for this year. So definitely check that out as well. And I would also direct everyone to their Bandcamp page. You can buy the track for $1. And like I said, it is a 100% of the income derived from the track goes to charity. So I definitely recommend everyone purchasing that.
When I saw it on your list, I was like, absolutely flabbergasted that it came out in 2020. Like, it felt like I heard that song 3 years ago. I forgot that it came out, but I agree with you. It's definitely, in my opinion, it was one of the best songs of 2020, and is definitely, we'll post that as well. It's definitely worth hearing. Really, really good tune.
Could not agree more. 2020 felt like an eternity. So I'm not too surprised that it felt like years ago. But I think that's puts a nice bow on this week. Next week we come back with Within Temptation's Mother Earth, and we look forward to you all joining us at that time.
Absolutely. Thanks again for all of the positive feedback, the reviews, the ratings. I think I said this before, but I'll say it again. I'm kind of amazed at how many people are listening out there, and it's much appreciated.
Definitely, I definitely agree with that, and we hope that continues into the new year. So with that, we will sign off. Hope all is well, and I will talk to you soon, bud.
All right, take care.